Alabama running backs in the NFL just combined for the greatest season ever, combining for 6,536 rushing yards and 61 rushing touchdowns, but really that's just the start. The last 6 seasons in a row by Alabama running backs have been the 6 best statistical seasons by running backs from a single college all time. If you're new here, I'm Deeg. I track NFL and NBA production data for all colleges and post weekly position rankings on my X page, where I've been recognized by pages like Alabama Football and USC Hoops. Please consider subscribing if you want more content like this. But let's go ahead and dive into the NFL takeover from Alabama running backs. From 2019 to 2023, Alabama running backs continuously raised the bar in terms of what production looks like at the NFL level, with 5 straight seasons of over 4,700 combined yards and 42 plus touchdowns. But what they did this season in 2024 raised the bar another notch. Alabama accounted for 3 of the top 6 rushers in the NFL this year, including 4 1,000-yard rushers, led by Derrick Henry with 1,921 yards and 16 touchdowns, Jahmyr Gibbs with 1,412 yards and 16 touchdowns, and that's not even including all of his receiving production. Then you add in Josh Jacobs with 1,329 yards and 15 touchdowns, Najee Harris with 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, and for good measure, you can add in Brian Robinson Jr. with just under 800 yards and 8 touchdowns, and Jace McClellan's 32 yards to close it out. To put these record-breaking 6,500 yards and 61 touchdowns in perspective, the second closest school this year was Georgia, whose alums combined for 2,600 yards and 26 touchdowns. The race was over before it even started. Prior to this year, Alabama was the only school who had their running backs combined for over 40 touchdowns in an NFL season, and they had done it for 5 straight years. The next closest was Texas in 2003, in the prime of Priest Holmes and Ricky Williams. And this year, Alabama absolutely blows all records out of the water with a whopping 61 touchdowns, beating their own previous best of 45. To put it in perspective, about 1 in every 6 rushing touchdowns by a running back in the NFL this year was from an Alabama running back. When it comes to yardage, there had only been 4 seasons ever over 5,000. Miami in 2005 and 2007, counting on legends like Edgerrin James, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, and Frank Gore, and then Alabama in 2020 and 2022. Most notably, the 2022 season where Alabama was the first ever school to have over 6,000 yards by hitting 6,199. And this year, they did it again, beating their own record with 6,536 rushing yards by running backs. But now let's zoom out a bit. We've looked at these seasons in isolation, but how do the numbers look when we look at these stats in aggregate? Over 5 years, 10 years, this century, or even all time? Over the past 5 years, Alabama running backs in the NFL have combined for 27,000 rushing yards and 233 touchdowns. The next closest team, Georgia, has half of that, with 13,600 yards and 100 touchdowns, followed by Memphis, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin. This has been undoubtedly the best 5-year stretch of running back production by a school all time. But let's see how things look in a 10-year time span. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Alabama still reigns supreme, combining for 43,000 yards and 347 touchdowns in this time period, while Georgia and Oklahoma follow in second and third, just above 20,000 each. As some of you may be catching on, this domination really took off when Nick Saban's players started getting into the league. Although I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Shaun Alexander paving the way a few years prior to Saban arriving. But let's keep zooming out. If we look at this century, which are the last 25 years, things actually get really close. Alabama actually just took the lead in yardage from Miami this year, hitting 60,000, and holds a healthy touchdown lead with their 509 touchdowns. This shouldn't be too surprising considering some of the previous marks I mentioned for Miami in the earlier 2000s in this video. They are followed by Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas in the top 5. But now let's go back all the way back to 1966, when the NFL merger happened. From then to now, there's actually one school that has outrushed Alabama all time. And honestly, it's by a pretty large margin. Any guesses? It's Miami, with guys like Frank Gore, Edgerrin James, Otis Anderson, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Lamar Miller, and many more. Miami has combined for a whopping 91,377 yards and 640 touchdowns. That production really peaked in the 2000s, but has rapidly slowed down around the same time that Alabama took off. At the rate Alabama has been producing running backs, and most importantly, producing in the league, it should only be a matter of time until Alabama catches up to Miami. In fact, Alabama only passed up Georgia to take up second place this year. And frankly, I don't think they'll be looking back at all. But what do you guys think? How many years do you think it'll take for Alabama to claim the throne from Miami? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about NFL production for many other positions, make sure you subscribe below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.